Hello and welcome to Model Railroad Techniques. If you're coming directly from Kaustav's train and dioramas, we've covered in part 1 of this build and talked about the philosophies of kit building versus scratch building. Then fantastic, and thank you for coming across to my channel. We've got a great show ahead of you for you, all you guys and girls. If you found this video for the first time, then I think it would be best if you visit Kaustav's video channel and then come back over here. Link is up here in the cards and also in the description below. In Kaustav's channel, we showed you how we both built similar little boats in 2 different scales. Here is my little boat in HO, and here is Kaustav's little boat in N scale. Hey Kaustav.
Hello Dazzy Jay. Thank you so much for the great concept that you have proposed, and I'm really happy to be here. Now, for the benefit of your viewers who don't really know me, my name is Kaustav Chatterjee and I produce the channel Trains and Dioramas, where we have shown you part 1 of this build.
So without further ado, let's get started. Now comes the fun bit, painting the hull. So what I looked at using was a Art Deco sort of a warm white colour with also a sea glass greeny sort of colour, and I just mixed that in my palette, and then I used quite a sort of a thin long brush, as you can see there, so that's about 1/2 inch wide. So it's just a matter of long deliberate brush strokes. Being it's sort of black underneath, I sort of wanted that some of that colour coming through, so it will take 2 or 3 coats to get the colour grading that you want and coverage. So we're all ready for painting the pilot or the cab of the boat. So the colours I'm going to be using are, so I'm going to start with sort of a chocolate brown type colour or an umber, an ochre type colour, a yellowy ochre colour, and then the overwash, which is the darker sort of burnt umber type brown. And then I'll go back in dry brushing with a sort of an antique white type colour as well. So the brush I'm going to use is sort of I think that's about a number 3. And then I'm just going to pick off individual boards and paint each colour individually, sort of spread it out in a non-random sort of fashion. So don't be alarmed. Obviously, when you start going through this, the painting does look very, very overbearing and very patchy, as you can see there. But rest assured, once you put that overwash in, it sort of ties all the colours together quite nicely. And it's actually quite a nice weathered wood effect. So we're going to go in with some of the highlight colours now. So we're looking at a sort of an antique white, and also I showed sort of khaki bone type colour. So that's what I'm going to go in. So it's just a dry brushing technique. You can see I've gone through and tied all those colours together quite nicely with that dark ochre. So it's just a matter of, with the dry brushing, put a little bit of paint on the brush and get rid of most of it on either a paper towel like I'm doing there, or on a piece of paper. So it's just a matter of using a real fine brush and just picking up all those highlights. So I've probably gone overboard a little bit on that. You can see I wipe it off with my finger. So don't be scared to do that. If you do go overboard with the dry brushing, don't be scared to go back in with your finger and just give a bit of a wipe to sort of tone it down a little bit. So it's just a matter of working around the rest of the model and just bring up those highlights, which really gives a nice aged wood effect. Let's go and see what Kaustav's doing.
Coming back to my little boat, now that the main components are built and painted, time to start detailing. First up was the wheel. I glued a tiny piece of 1mm diameter styrene rod to a small piece of 1mm cardboard. Painted it a natural wooden brown tone, glued it on the starboard side of the wheelhouse, and then glued a broken N-scale brake wheel that I was saving for last 4 years to put to some good use. For the smokestacks, I took a paper clip, cut to appropriate length, painted it black and glued on the port side. I had already drilled a hole on the roof of the pilot house and pushed the smokestack through that hole and glued the wheelhouse in place to complete the assembly.
Thanks, Kaustav. That's looking absolutely gorgeous. So now over to my little boat. So whilst the hull's drying, what I'm doing here, I'm just going to start picking up some of the details on the very few detail parts. So that's just a drum. So right now that's a sort of a khaki type color. It's looking horrendous, but what I'm actually trying to do is just pick up some of the individual boards on a raw sienna and also probably a warm whitish type colour. I'll go on dry brush. So what I'm doing here, I'm just yet again just on a very fine brush, just picking up the detail with each of those on it. It's like a fishing crate that'll sit in the boat where all your tackle and various things go. So it's obviously made out of wood, so I'm just trying to age that up and weather it up. So I'm sort of going halfway between sort of dry brush and a wet brush type technique here. It's a little bit hard to see because it's such a small little piece, but it's just picking up each of the boards just to give it a bit of colour variation. So that's sort of the finished product. I've obviously gone back on with that and gone with the overwash, which sort of just ties all those colour together nicely. So it's exactly the same as I did on the pilot. Kaustav, you there? Let's see what Kaustav's got for us in India.
Now the fun begins. For the propeller, I introduced an even thinner cardboard to the mix. 0.1mm hot press tight grain craft board. I drew the shape of the propeller freehand and then cut it using an ultra precision craft knife. I drilled a hole on the transom and glued a small piece of wire. The process damaged the paint in that area, so I repainted the stern. Put a little drop of super glue on the wire and glued the tiny propeller in place. Once the glue dried and the propeller was secured, I twisted the blades to give it a proper three-dimensional shape. I mixed some yellow ochre and gold acrylic paint to make a metallic brass stone. Painted the propeller assembly in this brass color. For the rudder, I cut an appropriate piece of 0.2mm cardboard. Then I added little pieces cut from 0.1mm cardboard to simulate hinges and reinforcement plates. I painted the rudder blade in rust color, denoting that it's metal. The hinges and reinforcement plates were painted with burnt umber to denote heavy rusting. The rest of it was left white. After gluing the rudder in place, I realized that the rudder blade is too big for the boat, so I cut about 0.5mm from the end and painted the edge same rusty brown. The boat is finally seaworthy. I was ambitious to get a 4-pronged anchor in N scale, so I bent 2 tiny pieces of soft wire and glued them using super glue. Then I glued it on a straight piece of wire. I painted it black and left it for paint to cure. I had a few spare steel drum covers from an N scale kit, that type that you see on that little drum. I cut 2 pieces and cleaned them. Then I cut a small piece of 1mm styrene rod and glued it between the 2 discs using super glue. I extended the rod by gluing a couple of tiny pieces on the outer sides of the end plates. You have no idea what I'm making, right? Well, let me break the suspense and tell you, this is going to be a fisherman's winch. I glued a couple of thin strips on the outside of the rods to make a bracket and then painted it black. Then I glued it on the starboard side right after the wheelhouse. I painted the inner parts a rusty brown to show some aging. Then I glued a couple of bent wires on the bracket to denote guiding prongs of the fishing net.
Let's get into some weathering on my little boat. So the last portion of this build is just to tidy up, weather up I should say, the hull area. So we're going to be using a slate grey by Americana. So the first step here is, these are all dry brushing techniques as well, so hence why I've got a freshly ripped off piece of paper towel there, and it's just a matter of putting a little bit of paint on the brush and getting rid of it, as all dry brushing techniques are. Then it's just a matter of vertical strokes down the hull, so you can sort of see I'm just feathering the edges there, and I'll show you very shortly what that looks like. And I'm just going to build the colours, starting with a sort of a grey colour, and what it does, it just emulates the chipping of the paint, just the wear and tear as the hull has been sort of rubbing up against various tyres and jetties and rubbing up against other boats and other fixed objects in its life. So the next colour we'll go on with is a burnt umber by the same company, Art Deco or Americana. So same sort of technique, just a dry brush. As I explained before, I'm just here building the colours, so this is just going to emulate the grime. So just be very careful not to go overboard with this, because this sort of just adds a little bit of rusting to it, as well as, I appreciate it's a wood boat, however, just as it's been leaning up against maybe rusty docks and the like, it'll just like take on that colour stain. Gone in with a sort of a moss green. So what I want to do here is start doing the trim sort of around the top. hindsight is a very lovely thing in this hobby, as we all know. I probably should have done this before I started doing some of the weathering and chipping type effect that I'm doing. So it's just a matter of just, I think it's a number 3, number 4 brush, and just ever so slightly just going around the top there, just try to get that nice little neat sort of line, just to sort of break the colour of the hull up a little bit. So after going back through with that green highlighter on the top of the hull, what I'm doing here, I'm just going back through with burnt umber again, just gunging up the hull, just sort of aging it up. So I sort of go between a dry brushing and also using sort of a sponging technique. So I'm just trying to pick up some of the corners and just some of the places that are going to be high sort of traffic areas where the boat will get damaged over time. It didn't take a lot of footage of me putting the boat together. It's just a matter of using a bit of CA glue, just sticking the pilot to the hull there. And you can sort of see all the gunge and all the chipping effect on the side of the hull there that I tried achieving. It's come up quite nicely. So one of the last steps here, we're going in with like a light browny thorny colour. So what I'm going to do here is go through with a sponging technique and just keep building up the colours, which gives another sort of chipping effect. So you can see I'm just working my way around the deck area there, just getting all the paint off so we don't go in with too much paint there. If you do find you've gone in with too much paint, you can always just wipe your finger over it. So as you can see, I'm using a pair of tweezers there, just so I can just use just a little small square of sponge. Another technique that I learned from Kaustav here is I go in with a 6B pencil. So that's like the little binding posts at the front of the boat where the mooring ropes would be held against or roped against. And I find that's quite a very effective technique. So what that actually does is it just gives a worn metal look. So it looks like over time that the binding post has been worn away due to the friction with the rope. So I'm going there with Tuscan red just to do the navigational lights. Now, as I'm actually voicing over this, I've realised the red is on the wrong side. So the red needs to go on the port side, which is the left side, and then green goes on the right side, or the starboard side. So now we're just drilling in a small little hole on the top there with that pin vise. So what I'm going to put in there is the stovepipe or exhaust pipe type thing for the engine of the boat. So it's just a little piece of brass rod. Then I'm just going to use a pair of pliers there just to sort of taper the edge and just give it a more realistic look. So I'm going to paint it this soft black colour, which is more of a browny black colour, just sort of emulate a bit of soot and grunge. I didn't undercoat the brass rod, I just painted it straight on because it took the colour quite well. Let's see how Kaustav weathers up his little boat.
It's a good time to weather the model so that the final bits of details can be added. I used tiny amounts of soft pastel to weather the boat. My choice of color was grey, black, white and raw sienna. Then I'd wet my detail brush in the dirty paint mixed water and added some streaking by applying some rapid vertical strokes. The dirty water and the existing soft pastel would create very tiny and subtle streaking on the model appropriate for the scale. The drum that you saw before was painted light blue, and I added some paint chipping on the edges and raised parts by rubbing a pencil. Once satisfied, I placed the drum in the aft. I made a coil of rope using number 40 crochet thread of light grey color. Then I cut the anchor and glued it at the front of the coil using super glue. Once done, I glued the rope and anchor on the deck. You cannot have a seaworthy fishing boat without life bells. I took some solder and shaped a couple of perfect bells around a thin skewer. I shaped and filed them and then painted them red. Once the red paint had dried, I added the white bands using my detail brush. I used a thin strip of cardboard to make a bracket for the life bells and glued it on the outside wall of the wheelhouse. I added a coil of rope around one of the life bells for some added visual interest. I used super glue to make sure that the thread stays in place. Painted a 2mm cardboard strip in yellow ochre and then cut little pieces out of it. Glued them on the deck to simulate wooden bits. The boat is looking fabulous now, so I decided to seal all the little joints with Tester's dull coat lacquer. I didn't need the lacquer to get the matte finish in this case because I used ultra matte chalk paint. Here it is mainly used to protect the paint and also to ensure that all those fragile joints have a strong layer binding them to the boat. I painted a 2.5mm styrene tube in aluminium color. Then I cut about 2mm of it once the paint dried. I built a V-shaped bracket out of soft steel wire and glued the styrene disc to it. I painted the front white, and once the paint dried, I used my Testors Model Master Clear Part cement to create a convex lens shape. This is going to be the headlight. To make the bumper guards, I cut 5mm pieces of thin heat shrink tube, slid them on a thread, and then used an old soldering iron to shrink them to fit the thread. Got 6 of them in a row and then cut the thread in the middle to get 3 of the bumpers for each side. I used super glue to fix the bumpers just below the blue beam and then glued the threads around the bits. The last thing to add was the headlights. I used super glue to fix it on the roof.
Here you go, folks, 2 different paths that lead to the same results. Now that we've finished the model, let's talk about the methods. Kit building gives you the basic guide, the starting point if you might say. You have the basic parts, and in many cases manufacturers provide detailed instructions, and it's a great place for beginners. But you don't get fooled that every kit is a little boat. There are some incredible kits out there that require considerable amount of expertise and skills for you to be able to do justice to them, and they'll take sometimes up to hundreds of hours to build.
And I second that, though I prefer scratch building as opposed to kit building because it is expensive to import quality kits here in India, but I have built my fair share of kits and I have more to build. Scratch building, on the other hand, has its own charm and provides immense opportunity to build something following a particular prototype. I mean, if you really look at my model railroad behind me, all these cranes, the structures, and even those, even the moving bascule bridge, all that is built from scratch, following, an example in the real life world. And that is amazing.
Since kit building starts with a base, you don't have to worry about knowing the nitty-gritties of what you're building. Just follow the instructions closely. Refer to some photos of something in the real world if you can. But even without that, you possibly fare pretty well.
Now, for scratch building, you definitely need a point of reference in the real world. I mean, you don't necessarily have to copy something exactly as I've already shown in this particular build. I actually built something based on another model, but you need to draw the inspiration from the real world at some point or the other. Now, scratch building provides you immense freedom, really. Now, once you have an idea in your mind exactly what you want out of your model, you can tweak it and you can change it to suit your fancy or your constraint. Yet you have your immense ability to retain the realism that you desire from your model.
If you want to know more about how to build some excellent kits, check out my videos here in the description below.
And if you want to see how to build some excellent scratch build model, then you can find them in my channel, Trains and Dioramas, link in the description below. And until next time, have fun making miniatures.
Until next time, thanks for watching. Remember to hit that like button, make any comments, suggestions, and subscribe if you haven't done already. So thanks for watching, technicians, and I'll see you next time.